Hello and welcome back to the video darkroom. I have made a number of videos recently about this little camera, the Sony RX1R Mark II. And there's quite a bit of interest in this camera recently. For example, Mark Gaylor has done an excellent review of it and gone through in absolute detail all the specifications of this camera and how it matches up maybe to a modern day camera. I say a modern day camera because this camera is basically 10 years old. It's 10 years old, but it's had such a revival of interest, and the prices that this camera goes for, I mean, currently a second-hand version of this currently costs about £2,000 in the UK. That is quite a lot, really, for a camera that's 10 years old. So in this video, I want to just consider that if Sony does decide to update this camera, what would I like to see changed in the camera? And what would I like to see retained in the camera in order to keep its characteristics, you know, for example, the size of the camera and other things like that. So first of all, I'm going to look at what I would like to see updated in the camera. The first thing that I would like to see updated in this camera is the sensor. And that's not because there's anything particularly wrong about the sensor. The sensor is the same sensor that was in the Sony Alpha A7R Mark II. And it's a great sensor. It produces great performance, good low light performance, good dynamic range. It's 42 megapixels and it's pretty good. But in 10 years, sensor technology has moved on a bit, so I would like to see maybe the updated sensor that's in the A1, something like that, and see this camera fit for another 10 years to come. Secondly, I'd like to see something like the autofocus system that's in the latest cameras, such as the A7R Mark V, that really lock on and that can cover human faces, animal faces, and that have a degree of AI built into them. I would think that is definitely something that could be put into this camera, and something that is really needed, because this is one of the drawbacks of the camera, that the autofocus system, being 10 years old technology, really could do with a significant update. I would really like to see this camera capable of recording 4K video. I know it's not primarily a video camera, and it's not something that I would want to use it for that much, but it really is lacking in the video capabilities a long way. It can only record 1080p video and doesn't record any 4K, but the sensor is clearly capable of it, and I would like to see it record 4K. I know that there may be a problem with overheating because the camera is, you know, the camera body is really tiny, and so there's not much ventilation or ability to let the heat escape from the camera. So I know that you wouldn't be recording 30-minute 4K videos, but if you compare this with the little RX100 Mark VII, then I think you'll see that it should be possible for it to record good 4K video, at least for 5 or 10 minutes before there's an overheating issue on it, and that would be a real advantage to this camera. There are many other things I think that should be updated in this camera by way of a technology update, things that have changed a lot over the last 10 years. For example, I would like to see it support the new SD cards that are here. This one really only supports the older cards, and it doesn't support the newer cards that are out that are faster. That is an obvious thing that should just be updated on it. There are various other things like that as well. So it should get all the technology updates that brings it up to the spec of a current Sony camera. I would like to see this camera get the new menu system. I'm sure that any update that Sony would do would bring the new menu system, but that would allow the Creators app to be used with it, and a reasonable way of transferring images up and down to the cloud or to your mobile phone, because it's really seriously primitive using the old Imaging Edge app here, and it's a bit of a chore to transfer any images, and you're not even transferring the raw versions, you're just transferring basically a JPEG preview up to your phone, and that's not really particularly useful. I would like to see the addition of a touch screen on this. The screen is fine, that's on the camera here, but it's not a touch screen. And even the little RX100 Mark 7 has a great touch screen on it, and it allows you, when you're working with the camera through the viewfinder, it allows you to use your thumb on the touchscreen to move the focus point around and control various aspects of the camera. And I think that that would be a really useful thing to have in this RX1 as well. And finally, in terms of improvements, I would like this camera to have a sensor for infrared control. The ability to have a remote control for this camera is seriously limited, and having an infrared remote control would just make it so much easier to shoot images when you're not actually wanting to touch or move the camera itself. There are some things that I would like to retain on the camera, and these areas may be a bit more controversial. Strangely, I would like to retain the battery size that's on this camera. They are these little tiny Sony NP-BX1 batteries. They are really tiny. I'm not a great lover of them in any respect whatsoever, but they fit into the bottom of the camera and they don't create any bulk at all. Whereas if we were to use the new larger Sony batteries, then there would have to be a massive increase possibly to where the hand grip goes on the camera, and I think that would change the form factor of the camera quite a lot. The little batteries that are in this camera don't last very long. You might get about 30 minutes of shooting. Depends really whether you switch your camera off or whether you leave it on all the time or not. But I find it's okay. You can get a reasonable amount of shooting done. And what I would prefer, rather than use the bigger batteries, is I like this little Telesin battery charger that holds 3 spare batteries in it. So if we just take one of these out, it holds these little spares in the charger, and so I can easily just pocket 3 of these and take them along with me, and really this just slip into your pocket. That means you've got a total of 4 batteries, and that'll see you through a day's shooting. There's no problem with that at all. So in order to keep the camera's form factor, I think it would be useful maybe to keep the same battery. Now, there are updates to battery technology that make them slightly better. The updates that are used in the latest mobile phones allow the batteries to charge faster and have higher capacity within the same size. So it'd be nice to see an improvement to the battery technology that's used, even though the form and size of the battery remains the same. The real thing that I would want to retain, I've given a hint of already, and that is I would like to retain the form factor of this camera. I wouldn't like it to get any bigger. Sony already has the A7C Mark II and the A7CR, and they are a little bit bigger than this. They have a bigger grip on them, and they're a little bit heavier than this camera. And I, you know, if I wanted a bigger camera, I would get one of those. And they're great cameras, no criticism at all. But what I really love about this is the fact that it would slip into your pocket, that it's really tiny. It slips into, you know, a small sling bag that you might be carrying around anyway. And I just really appreciate the form factor of this being one of the smallest full frame cameras that you can get on the market. So I don't want Sony to make changes to this that would impact that. And that brings me on to the next point. I don't think that Sony should introduce in-body stabilization to this camera. It doesn't have any in-body stabilization. If you're shooting video, it has steady shot for video, which provides a crop factor up to about 42 millimeters and allows some digital stabilization to be applied to your footage as you're recording it. But if we were to add in-body stabilization to the sensor of this camera, it would mean putting the sensor into a little cradle with motors, and that would be not really very easy to do within the form factor of the camera. So if you ask me which one I wanted to retain, I'd like to retain the size at the sacrifice of in-body stabilization on the sensor. Then finally, there's a situation regarding the lens that I'm not really quite sure how Sony would handle this. This lens is a Zeiss Sonar 35mm f2 lens, and it's absolutely brilliant, but Sony no longer has that partnership with Zeiss, and so therefore it's unlikely, I think, that it's going to be a Zeiss lens that's on the camera if the camera is updated. So it would be a Sony lens, and I would be pretty keen for Sony to continue to use the 35mm focal length and to have not less than an f2 aperture on the lens. So so I'm pretty happy with the basic spec of the lens that's here, but I guess it would be changed to be a Sony lens in the future if Sony update the camera. Then finally, there's the question of price. This camera has always been a premium camera. It has a relatively niche market. It's not a beginner's camera. It's for the serious amateur, the enthusiast who wants a really high quality camera in a small form factor that they can carry with them wherever they go. And I think it needs to stay that way. It will be, in terms of technology, ahead of the Fuji X100 Mark VI. And it will be a challenger to the Leica Q3. I think it should be priced somewhere in between those two cameras. I'm guessing that it will work out at about £3,500 to £4,000 in the UK. I guess a bit over $4,000 in US terms. And I think that would be the right positioning for a camera like this. I want Sony to put all the premium tech that they've got into it without increasing the form factor size. So that's my view on what I would like to come next for the RX1 if Sony do decide to update it. If they don't, I guess the best option is an A7CR with maybe the 40mm f2.5. That lens wouldn't particularly appeal to me as much. I do prefer the slight extra width of the 35mm, and I definitely prefer having an f2 to an f2.5, even though it's not even a full stop of difference yet. It does make a difference to me. So those are my thoughts. Some of them are controversial. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. Do you think there is scope for an update to this camera? Would you buy it if it was £4,000 in the UK? And what features would you like to see? And what features have I suggested that you're maybe not fussed about? So I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.